Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Deborah Colbin. I am the editorial director at 70 Faces Media. I'm very happy to be here tonight as part of our Folio literary series. I want to thank the team at 70 Faces Media and the Jewish Week for putting together this fabulous series. And of course, I want to thank our partners at the UGA Federation of New York. I am very, very excited to welcome tonight Zibby Owens. Thank you, Zibby, for being here. I've had the pleasure of knowing Zibby for many years, back when she was a contributor to the Feller, our parenting site. But in addition to that, Zibby is the best-selling author of several books, including Blank, a novel, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, Princess Charming, and the forthcoming novel Overheard. She is the editor of 3 anthologies, Moms Don't Have Time to Have Kids, Moms Don't Have Time to Read, and her most recent and what we'll be focused on tonight on Being Jewish Now. Zibby has regularly contributed to Good Morning America, Vogue, Oprah Daily, and many other outlets. And if that wasn't enough, Zibby is also the founder and CEO of Zibby Media, dubbed the Zibbyverse by the Los Angeles Times. This empire includes the Zibby Books boutique publishing house, Zibby's Bookshop, an independent bookstore in Santa Monica, which is fabulous, and the award-winning daily podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, Zibby's Book Club, and Zibby Retreats for book lovers that I believe brings book lovers together in places like Palm Springs. Vulture has called her New York City's most powerful bookfluencer. So welcome, Zibby.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm sure I missed something, but I feel like that was a pretty good,
I think you covered it. All
Okay,
good.
okay, great. Okay, so I think it's sort of amazing to look at this combination of things that you do in your day-to-day life. And at the same time, over the past year, you've also taken a big shift in your attention. Most recently, you put together this anthology on Being Jewish Now. You can hold it up here. I'll hold mine up. Everyone can see both. And we will, for those of you who don't already have it, we'll share a link to make sure you know where to get a copy. This book is a really interesting collection of essays by 75 authors, really grappling with what it means and feels like to be Jewish after October 7th. And I would love for you just to sort of start us off by explaining a bit about the book and how it came to be and why you took this project on.
Sure. Yes, this book was not the plan, but I thought of it and then had to do it and have been throwing everything at it ever since. Basically, to back up, after October 7th, I immediately got involved, started posting on both my personal and the company and whatever platforms in support of Israel and everything else. And immediately was met with so much backlash. And as time went on, more and more signs of anti-Semitism came my way, directly, indirectly, to the industry. And I just felt called to help. I also had a platform, and so I felt if you can, you must. And so I wrote articles, I posted on Substack, I posted on Instagram, blah, blah, blah. And yet I felt like it wasn't really doing anything. Was one voice ever going to matter? Could it change this sort of tsunami of hate coming our way? And meanwhile, after October 7th, another author, Alison Hammer, asked if I would like to be part of Artists Against Anti-Semitism, which was a new nonprofit, now a 501c3 that she was starting to help on college campuses and wherever the need was greatest. And of course I said yes, like what can I do? And I helped, and I like made the first website and just got involved. And because of that, I was part of this group chat of all of the other founding authors. There are about 30 women founding authors of Artists Against Anti-Semitism. So I had the privilege of being part of the conversation. I'm sure many people, you included, people watching on this Zoom tonight, are part of group chats that shared news they couldn't believe, and updates and support and other things. And in this group chat, because everybody's an author, they were often well written little texts and things like that. And I just thought, wow, if everybody else could read an expanded version of the group chat, they would feel so much less alone, right? Because we all have each other. There are 30 of us, and maybe if we shared our stories and uplifted, it would uplift all our voices and maybe make more of a dent, not only to help Jewish people feel less alone, but also hopefully to catch the attention of potential allies who would read about our experience and realize, like, oh, wait, they're just like normal people. And I also love my family, and I also like food, or whatever it is. So I thought of it and I said, wait, I know how to do anthologies. And since my last two, which I were the very first books I published, and I did not even think about having a publishing company myself then. Now that I have a publishing company, I knew I could just do it through our company, even though we had a full slate of books coming out. So I called Anne Massetti, who is our publisher, and I was like, do you think we could somehow manage to do this? And she was like, we will find a way. And so we found a way. So this special team of us off to the side just cranked on it. I edited every essay. I recorded the bios. We did the audiobook. I was on every side of this project, which was fascinating and invigorating. And being a contributor to it, and the editor of it, and the publisher of it, I'm just like all in on this book. I'm like, this is why I'm boasting about it so much. So that's really how it happened.
I mean, there's 75 contributors, which is an extremely impressive number of people. But I'm curious, sort of, how did you go about beyond that original pool of people who were part of the organization? What did your call out look like? How many people wanted to be involved? And also just sort of what was your mindset as you were selecting them? What were you trying to demonstrate in the anthology?
I was trying to get a wide variety of people and opinions and backgrounds. Even though we're all Jewish, people come from obviously so many different places and cultures and ethnicities and everything else. So that was part of what I wanted. I have been hosting Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, the podcast, for the last 6 years, and have interviewed 2,000 authors at this point. So within my network of people from the show, I was like, who have I interviewed who I've noticed posting? Like, who did I think would be likely to want to write about it? Because, of course, there are people who are sort of more publicly Jewish and who are speaking out more and blah, blah, blah. So I just started asking people who I thought would be interested in doing it, people who I hoped might do it. Some of the other of the 30 founding authors asked a few of their friends, and in total we asked 200 people, and 75 said yes. Actually, 76 said yes, and one had to drop out. But that's how it happened. And I didn't do an open call. I didn't post this anywhere. It was just individual emails to individual people.
Can you give us a few examples of sort of the kinds of things that surprised you or touched you in any of the essays, if there's any particular one you want to mention or call out?
Well, the essays span the full range of emotions. Some I found really funny, like Mark Feuerstein's essay about breakdancing at his bar mitzvah in the 90s, and then how he did it again, 80s, 90s, now he did it again at his kid's bar mitzvah. So just funny, relatable, like middle-aged people trying to like move their bodies, but always getting hurt. It's like the phase I'm in, I feel like. So things like that, which were funny. Then I had things like um, this beautiful sort of poetic "To Be an Israeli Mom" essay, which I cry really every time I read it. Images of moms folding the IDF uniforms and hanging them on laundry hooks and not knowing if your child is going to come back, and what do you say to that mom, and it could be your child. So then there are like, soul stirring, poignant essays. There are examinations into why, like, well, examinations into why some people became activists, unlikely activists during this time. Then things like why they hadn't adopted more of their Jewish identity before and how they have now. Things like challah recipes from Brenda Janowitz, who we're actually doing a challah bake online tomorrow. Um, and it's the full range. It's funny. Amy Efron wrote a funny thing about getting into a fight with a mohel back in the day. My assignment was really, what does it mean and how does it feel to be Jewish now? You can talk about things that I wanted to hear stories only they could tell. So if they were sitting across the table from someone and like sharing over coffee, like what are the stories and experiences you would share? Not like a political treatise. Like I didn't want journalist style nonfiction op-eds. I wanted from the heart. I mean, find a post on an op-ed site, you
Right.
know.
Do you think for many of the authors, that October 7th, like that they find themselves relating to themselves as Jews very differently pre and post October 7th? Was that sort of the common thread for everyone who contributed to this?
That definitely was a theme. Um, pride in being Jewish was another huge theme. Um, and just some of the more universal feelings and values, Jewish values, tikkun olam, like all of that was sort of very pervasive. Like I feel like if you read the whole book, you get a sense of what, although we're so different, a sense of what the commonalities are that unite us and make us the special chosen people that we are. I'm saying this, in an upbeat tone, but obviously this has been an incredibly upsetting time, and that's another thing I think that the book does too. It's like this mix of pain and humor that we have to use to get through the hardest times, joking around and then crying, and always having hope because, Jewish people are quite resilient. But yes, there were many people, myself included, who felt a renewed commitment to Judaism because of it being so threatened. And sometimes, it's like I can say something about my mom, right? But I don't want anyone else ever saying anything about my mom. That's kind I mean, this is like reductive, but you come to the defense of the things and people that you love when they're under attack, and that is what happened here.
Right. I mean, I do think, right, everyone sort of, we understand that October 7th was this rupture. And I think that it's interesting to explore through these essays too, what are the sort of the echoes of that now and sort of how people are experiencing that rupture. And when you say sort of their reconnection to Judaism, I wonder too, for many people, is it the connection to the religion? Is it the connection to the identity? And obviously these things are
Right.
very intertwined and complicated for Jews. But were there essays in particular that you'd want to highlight where people are sort of the connection to the religion itself
Hmm.
as well sort of comes to the forefront?
Yes. In one essay, Rachel Berenbaum goes back to Temple more often now that she's, post October 7th, and she shares a story when she's there with women in her, Temple group and talking about like what can happen in 9 months. But the context is there, and there are other, Brenda Janowitz, I mentioned the challah, but like since then, she makes challah every week. Uh, People going to services more. Renee Rosen wrote about the candles that she made a point to always light on Shabbat, even though sometimes she used to forget or whatever, and how actually this one anniversary of Kristallnacht, in the middle of nowhere, she was just like sitting there, her glass candlesticks like got cracked on the anniversary. I mean, it gives me goosebumps. So there were just all sorts of things. Yes, the religious and the observance and all of that, but also the cultural. And I just from an identity standpoint, there were a number of essays about wearing a Jewish star,
Right.
different jewelry, being afraid,
Right. I think
and
I've definitely heard a lot of conversations, and I think was it Amy Klein maybe who wrote that piece in your book, but I think that people
yes,
sort of exploring those ideas of like wearing what it means to like sort of lean into wearing a Jewish star again. I think even especially maybe like for our generation, there was a sense of like you didn't do it, and I think then there was a sense of sort of returning to it, but also fear. And I've heard a lot of people grappling with that as well. Um, I think it's interesting too to think about, like, if you I think in your book you said, I wrote it down, you said before October 7th I hadn't experienced much anti-Semitism, just a sprinkle of sea salt on a big buffet. And I'm wondering if you sort of went back in time and you told yourself 10 or 20 years ago that you were going to put together a book that grappled with what it means and how it feels to be Jewish, sort of what would you have said? What would your parents have said? Like, would that have been a big surprise to you in your own life?
I don't think it would have been like a massive shock because I have always been writing so much about so many parts of me. They would have
Mhm.
been like, I think they would have been like, oh, huh, isn't that lovely? Like, but I don't think it would have been like because I have always been Jewish. Um, it is part of who I am. I spend a lot of time in my kids' Hebrew school, and it's part of who I am. But would it have been the first thing that But anyway, would I have anticipated all of the anti-Semitism coming my way? No.
Right.
No, I could never have imagined that. Could I have imagined an anthology of essays about it? I could have seen that.
Yeah. I should mention that if you have questions, you should feel free to put them in the Q&A and we'll address them as we go and also leave a little time at the end to make sure that we get to your questions. Um, I was going to ask you as well, sort of when you mentioned now, if you could imagine all of the anti-Semitism coming your way, obviously you've become also a big advocate within the literary space, but if you could talk a little bit about how you've experienced the anti-Semitism coming your way, and then we can talk a little bit about the ways too that you've been trying to combat it, and specifically within the literary and publishing space.
Sure. It really started with my novel Blank when Trolls sort of tanked my rating on Goodreads, which I think everybody here is probably familiar with, but obviously 5-star ratings are good and 1 stars are bad. 1 star is bad, and um, people were posting like Zionist racist and all sorts of things. In my novel, the character is Jewish. Not that anybody I think actually read this book or whatever, but um, my main character was Jewish because I'm Jewish, and it didn't really occur to me not to make her Jewish. The dog's name is Dayenu, and I mean that's not my dog's name, which you can see behind me, but it's just that was sort of the world I was living in. So that's where I think that's one of the first things that happened. Um, then
And do you think at
after
at that point had you already been sort of outspoken, or
I know I'm trying to remember the timeline. I should really write this up so I don't forget. I mean, after the Pittsburgh massacre, I like wrote an essay actually for Kveller about it. Like that night, I had gone to my friend's daughter's bat mitzvah, and I remember writing it like late at night, still wearing my coat and everything, just like having to get it out there. So I respond a lot when I think things are unfair, and when I feel moved to write, I just write. So I'm trying to think which came first, but anyway, that happened. I spoke out immediately on social media about being in support of Israel. Then the National Book Awards were coming up. I was one of the sponsors. Zibby Media was a sponsor of the National Book Awards, as we had been in the past. And um, I heard from the grapevine that all of the winners were planning on doing some coordinated speaking out against Israelis. And I didn't know what that meant. It was a rumor. And so I called the National Book Foundation, my contact there, and just said, "Have you heard that this is going on?" And she said, "Yes, we have heard that there is something being planned." No one knew what it was.
right,
Um, and I said, "Well, what's going to happen? Like, what if something, what if they start saying really terrible stuff? And what if it feels very threatening? And what if this happens? What if that happens?" And she said, "We believe in free speech, so we will let whatever happens happen." And I didn't feel like that was a good enough answer for me. I didn't feel like I could bring my team and myself into an environment where, God forbid, some really terrible things were being said and sit there and take it. I mean, they can do that if they want, but I don't have to like pay for their chicken, right? So, so I just said, I can't still support this if this is the attitude. Like, I believe in free speech too, of course, but I also believe in like if you're having an event, not having one group completely terrorize the other group, nor would this be something that would be okay with any other ethnic, racial, religious, sexual group, right? Like we won't, that's just not what we do. That's not what I stand for, it being part of anything that allows for that kind of blatant discrimination. So it was really an obvious decision. I didn't even like think it through too much. Like, okay, well, I can't sponsor this anymore. And it turned out that um, it got picked up as like an international news story because it was a symbol of the times and the effect in the publishing industry. And I became like a symbol, if you will. And I had so many people. I mean, that was a time of a lot of hate. I will say that. The story itself got twisted to say that I didn't believe in a ceasefire, and that's what I mean. Like, so I even wrote it all out. Like, this is what happened. I wrote it on my Substack, and despite that, news outlets misrepresented it, as they are doing a lot of things these days. But that's a whole nother story. So that also, but in addition to all the hate and like the podcast guests that were coming up who quickly canceled, and the people posting about it who I had thought were friends and quickly realized were not. Um, in addition to that, I had so many Jewish people emailing me and saying, like, through tears in the keyboards, like, thank you for speaking out. I feel so alone. I am so scared. I don't feel like anybody's saying anything. Like, thank you for doing this. And that gave me sort of more, um, you know, I don't know, confidence to just keep going, like knowing how needed it was. I mean, I know I needed it. And that is like, that is something that also led to this book, because when I was touring for Blank, people would come up to me all the time and just like take me aside and just say, like, quietly, like, thank you for speaking up for us, thank you for doing this, please don't stop. And I get these notes all the time, and I realized like more and more people were sort of looking to me, and I didn't mean to be like a notable public figure. I just was doing what I felt like was right all along. And I'm not such a public figure. I mean, in this like tiny little world that I'm in, right? Like, let's not blow things out of proportion in this like tiny, tiny slice of life over here. But I just had to do it, and I know people need it, and I know people need this book to feel less alone. It's not about me or these authors. Like, people need something to do, something to read. We need, I really do feel like, well, anyway, I just feel like we need more things like where this is what we should do. Here are the 5 steps and you'll solve the problem. And
I have like 7 different things that I now want to ask you
I'm
coming up.
sorry, I'm sorry.
No. That was I think when you sort of talked about these women coming up to you and saying things to you in a whisper, it reminded me sort of in your introduction to like a sort of with your mom, right? Sort of saying that like you pointed out about your mom. I wasn't sure if it was when you were younger or more recently that like you sort of pointed out to her that like, if she's talking with someone and then she starts talking about Jewish things, like she'll do it in a whisper.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot of about everything that you're doing right now is about not having a whisper, right? It's about actually really speaking out. And I think that like the move with the National Book Awards, like that, I can imagine that was very scary. Like, you're saying it in a way that it was obvious and you knew exactly it was what you were going to do. But I can imagine being in your situation and that, it's a lot to navigate. It's a lot of pressure, and a lot of it feels very new. I would
Yes.
say for us in the lives that we have lived in a
Yes.
fairly privileged way in navigating anti-Semitism. So
And
it's
it then put me on all the like author blacklists.
right.
Not one of them would, but like several others that were going around on Twitter of like, people that they shouldn't support and were on the list. And I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, like, this is not the list I had in mind when I wished to be on the list.
There's all different kinds of lists.
Yeah.
And I think over the past year, it's been also, the literary world has been really also sort of in the center of a lot of the Israel critique and pro-Palestine sort of activism. And I think the letter that came out most recently, I would say was, for those of you who didn't see it, there was the letter that came out at very end of October, beginning of November, I think. And it's not surprising because there have been many of these letters in the literary world, but the scope and then there's sort of it was a lot of the literary giants of the moment, right? Sally Rooney, Percival Everett, Jhumpa Lahiri, folks like that, who all signed a letter declaring Israel's actions in Gaza as a genocide and really calling for a boycott of Israeli literary institutions. They said they didn't want their books translated into Hebrew, and sort of the list went on from there. And I do think like the prominence and the number of people who signed that of that proposed boycott, like did set it apart. And I think then you were part of a counter movement that came along. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Um, yeah, I don't like to sign protest letters in general. Normally, I'm like, I'm just gonna stay over here. I'm happy to like share my own opinions, but I don't usually like join things like that. But this was just so obvious. And I know I keep saying these things were obvious. Like it was only after where I see the effects, but it was just so obvious. Like this is wrong. Like this is so wrong. How can all these authors be getting together and just condemning all of basically Israel and the literary world there and like the talent and it's just unthinkable that like you could say that about a group of people essentially based on religion. Like, can you imagine if this was, I mean, I know I say this all the time, but could you imagine doing this to another group of people? There would be outrage. Somehow it's all okay, which is the worst part of this whole thing. But so I signed the counter letter, which was to say like this is not okay, essentially is really what it was. And 1,000 people signed that, and then more people signed the other one. And again, it's this betrayal. There's so many people I knew and who I've had on my show and helped in so many ways, and it's just like, really, you too? I mean, I don't know. I just the betrayal, and actually many people wrote about this in the book from a professional standpoint, but also from a friendship standpoint, like Ali Rosen writing about her best friend, best friend who betrayed her. I mean, that is a thing that is hard to get over. That's hard. That's heartbreak. Anyway, it's hard sometimes for
Right.
hearts to heal.
Right. I mean, I do think, right, we heard the sentiment of people feeling abandoned, and I think that's what you hear too among many of these writers.
Yeah.
But in ways they did, in ways they didn't,
Yeah.
expect.
And not to mention that like nobody was picking up this story. So finally I posted it and with like a pile of newspapers and I was like, here's what's not in the paper. Like this whole thing, it was in one paper, like in the UK or somewhere, but like it was not picked up here. Like how can you not pick up the story? And then eventually, it's not because of me, but just like the timing or whatever, like it eventually was given some space, but you know, not enough.
Um, in terms of your anthology, how did you think about including voices from outside the US and especially from Israel? Was that important to you?
I'm delighted that happened. It was a goal and a hope, but it wasn't something I wasn't like looking through Israeli authors and picking random people. Like again, it was people who I knew or had relationships with and those of the people in the group chat. So yes, I definitely reached out to and I reached out to more who couldn't do it. But yes, it was really it was a wish. It was a hope and a wish. So I'm glad we could include several of their voices as well.
I'm curious about the timeline, right? Usually they say books take, 9 months from beginning to end. I'm guessing this did not have a 9-month time frame, but when did you start working on this, and then how quickly did you and your team publish it?
It was so fast. I thought of the idea and texted the group on June 30th of this summer.
That's insane.
It's
Okay.
insane.
Right.
And we came up with this crazy expedited timeline. This is why the ebook and audiobook came out a month sooner because they would be ready and the printing would take longer and distribution and all of that. But by October 1st, it was out in ebook and audiobook, which is so crazy. August, September, October. I mean, it's really fast, and it proves that it can happen. This is like one reason why I wanted to like try starting my own publishing company. I'm like, really, why are all these things so true and not changeable? Like, why do books have to come out on Tuesdays? Why do books have to take 2 years? So whatever, my book took like 2 months and came out on a Friday, and I'm like, okay, here it is. The world didn't end.
Has this sort of also changed over the past year? Have you been thinking differently about the books that you publish, or are you making more of an effort to publish Jewish authors? Obviously, it's also been a big conversation about a lot of authors sort of worrying about having a platform, being published, and whether or not they would still find home in publishing companies, publishing houses.
So we publish very few books. We started out with a goal of 12 a year. I think this year is 11. I think next year is 10. Um, our year is already full for next year and into 2026. So over the last year, we haven't even, we have acquired some books, but um, in terms of publishing, we're trying to pick books that we love and not pick books only based on who the authors are. Um, like in other words, I haven't found a disproportionate amount of books by Jewish authors to publish in the last cycle of acquisitions. I'm
Right.
getting a lot more submissions than we used to, but we don't publish historical fiction, and I do find that a lot of that are being written, a lot of novels. We only do novels and memoirs. We're basically not set up properly for a lot of the great books that are coming in. And we're actually having conversations about like, well, does this mean we should rethink our whole model? Like blah, blah, blah. But that's like, so, but as we are doing things now and as we have scheduled and all the contracts coming forward, we have certain guidelines and it just hasn't, I'm hopeful that we get a fabulous Jewish book soon. But what I'm also doing is I started an On Being Jewish Now Substack. So we're publishing, every day a new essay answering the same question that I posed to the anthology writers because so many people said, "Well, are you doing another anthology?" And, I'd love to be in part two. And I'm like, "Great, you don't have to wait for part two. Like, I'm going to get up next week. Just like, submit it." So we've also gotten a lot of people from all over the country submitting. And there was somebody who wrote from a perspective of being a Dutch Jew. And then the thing happened in Amsterdam. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I just posted that article with you." And so every day I'm collecting new voices and sharing those. And then we started an accompanying podcast where one of those contributors reads it every week. So I'm trying to get as many Jewish voices in and up immediately through the Substack, even though it's not the same as a book. But I feel like this is also timely and necessary now. I don't want to wait and do a whole nother thing. I want to just like keep the content going. And then who knows what'll happen from here.
I'm gonna pause to take some of the questions from the readers who they have many questions piling up. So I'm going to
Okay.
start addressing some of those and
Okay.
not, and then I'll go back to mine. We had someone who asked, it says, it's obvious that we need to support Jewish authors by buying, reading, and reviewing their books. But what can authors do to combat the anti-Semitism we're seeing in publishing these days?
I think the number one thing is calling it out when you see it, posting about it, sharing it. I think that the stories that need to be told are not being shared widely enough. I think documenting it, like keeping a record, it's like if you're in an abusive relationship or something, like you could like keep a record, like show proof, like dates and blah blah blah. I mean, this is probably not the best analogy, but just keep a record, write it down, don't forget, share it, make sure people know that it's happening because people can think something is happening in theory, but when you have like 10 things in a bulleted list, it's quite different. So speak up. I think it's really important to speak to non-Jewish friends about what's going on. So my husband and I are actually associate producers on this film called October Hate by Wendy Sachs and Deborah Messing. And we just went to the screening of it. And, Richie Torres was there and he was saying it's actually the fear on the part of the big middle that is the most destructive, not just the extremists on either side, but sorry, daughter. It's really important that everybody else knows about it and talks about it and all of that. So I think sharing it with a friend.
When he said the fear of the big middle, what was he referring to?
I'm sorry. So there's a huge spectrum of people who vehemently support and vehemently oppose, right? It's everyone else. Most people are not speaking out on either side. They're just like, I'm just gonna stand here, right? Like on the sidelines. It's not my fight.
Okay.
But actually, when you don't get involved, when you see something going on that's wrong, you are complicit. You are an accomplice to this thing that is happening. If you can't, if you see someone being beaten up on the street and you walk by because you're like, I don't know them, then sorry, um, then you're part of the problem. So
It's interesting.
you
I
have
mean,
to say
that's
something.
the same way we sort of often would talk about, or what we'd see on social media on some of our sites. If it's, Kveller or Hey Alma, or you'll see these people who are the most vocal and can give the impression that everyone exists on these polar opposites. But actually, we found that most people were in the middle. I would say before October 7th, the middle meant like they didn't know what to think about Israel, and
Mhm.
it wasn't necessarily even directly a part of their sense of being Jewish. And now I think sort of
Yeah.
it's evolved in certain ways, but it's what we see as well. Um, are you planning another anthology to which writers can submit their work?
Um, no, not at this moment, but please submit to On Being Jewish Now, the Substack. You can just go to onbeingJewishNow.com or go to Substack and find it. Um, right now, we're not considering another print anthology, but this just came out, so it's been like 13 days. So like, give me a minute. I am planning on doing like lots of events around the country and trying to meet people and seeing what people need. I feel like this book is what people need right now, but things are changing so quickly. One of the contributors, Corey Adjemi, and I just did an event this week, and she's like, I feel like we should have called it On Being Jewish Now and now and now and now. She's like, because my thoughts have already changed like 57 times since I wrote the essay.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And for the folks who are here who might be interested, what's the best way to submit to your Substack?
It's is it submissions. Hold on, let me double check it and I'll put it in the chat because I don't want to say it right. It's
Well,
submissions. I'm gonna just copy this. Submissions OBJN at zibbybooks.com. So I'm just gonna put it. Can I put it in the chat? Let's see. Hosts and panelists. Oh, maybe I can't. Well, it's
I think Beryl just did, so you're good. It's
oh,
there now.
okay. Okay. And the submissions instructions are on the Substack, which she already put it in. So thank you for that.
Um, okay. I'm just looking to see if we have some other questions come in. Um, what advice would you give to an early career Jewish writers in this climate?
Keep writing. Don't be scared. I have people emailing me every day. This young adult writer just sent me her manuscript, and I was like, "This is great! Like, you're a really great writer. Like, you don't have to worry. This is going to be great." And she's like, "I can't get this book published anywhere," um, which is terrible. But it doesn't mean you should stop writing. It doesn't mean you should stop trying. I feel like it's more important now than ever, and maybe there are the different distribution channels. Like, you don't have to necessarily go to like the big five houses, or there are lots of ways to get your books out in the world. You can self-publish, you can do audiobooks, you can go to much smaller indie presses, you can, once it's out there, you can do anything you want, right? So you just have to get it into physical form. um, the days of, I mean, I do feel that the days of the big five sort of having a complete monopoly are, books are being distributed and marketed in so many different ways now that it's still a powerhouse, obviously, but um, there are lots of ways to get the word out. You can even do a podcast where you read a chapter a day and you develop a huge audience that way. And then it gets picked up, or you self publish and sell a bazillion copies and then it gets picked up, or you do a Substack, just start writing. I think the main thing is trying to get your work in front of people. And I wouldn't be so caught up in the form of it. Maybe it ends up not being a book today, maybe it's a book later. But if the content is what's important, then get the content out. And content is being distributed everywhere. Pitch articles, pitch essays, find publications like Kveller and other sites that are welcoming to your type of work. Develop more of a list of clips right now instead of a book credit, right? There are times for different things, and I think the most important thing is just get your stuff out there.
Um, I'm curious, Zibby, on a slightly different topic, but because of sort of your role with your podcast, with thinking about yourself as a mom, moms don't have time to read. You're the mother of four. We got to see one of them, I think, in the
Yeah,
background at
sorry about
one
that.
point. I'm curious the kinds of conversations that maybe you and your friends have been having with your kids over the past year, or the kinds of things you and other moms in your circles or other parents in your circles sort of are talking about in these moments and over the past years, like things that have felt hard, things that have felt unclear. How much of this has filtered down to your kids, and sort of how much are you talking to them about it?
I mean, I'm talking to my kids about a lot of it. I mean, my daughter was sort of sitting in here for most of this, but she's heard me talk about this a lot. Um, you know, I I think it's important our kids know, usually in like age appropriate language or whatever, if you have smaller kids and all of that. Um, I think they need to be aware, but not to just scare them, right? Just to arm them with information. Like, here's what happened and here's what you should be aware of. I think a lot of parent to parent conversations are around like, is it okay for my daughter to wear her star necklace on the street? You know, because my kids do, and they don't want to stop, and I don't want to stop them. I also don't want them to get hurt ever for any reason. So, um, how much of a risk do you feel like it's taking? How much of a risk? I send them to Hebrew school. Like, I some days I just sit there because I'm so worried. I just like sit in the lobby and I'm like, whatever. I can work anywhere. So I think we are all like just so sick about the potential for harm if we don't get the world back on the trajectory it needs to be on, and what the ripple effect of that means, and how can we protect them and not frighten them, but also make them aware, and not let, I mean, I think one thing that's happened sort of systemically and because of the workings of Hamas over a 20-year period and all of that, like, is this infiltration into our society and our education system and schools and everything like that. Like, at the least, communicate with your own kids, right? That is the least we can do.
Did your kids, or at your schools, at their various schools, do these issues bubble up at all? Do they sort of have to confront it in any kind of way?
Yes. Yeah. My school, our kid, the school, my kids go to three different schools right now, um, just to make life really simple for all of us. But I think in general, the schools we're in relative to some of my friends' schools that their kids are in have been pretty good. Not perfect. There have been, we have another group chat on WhatsApp, for the Jewish community, Jewish affinity group. Um, and there are things that are upsetting. There was something that upset me, 2 days ago, but I'm like, "Ugh, of course, you know, of course this happens. I don't know, but pick your battles. In general, it could be so much worse. I feel pretty good about the schools my kids are in, and I think that the educators and the administrators are actually coming from a very good place, and they're trying to make the right calls, and sometimes they make mistakes, but so does everybody.
Have you ever considered publishing an anthology, or sort of writing from the perspective of kids or of teens, sort of as they've experienced?
Yes, actually. Last year I was starting up Zibby Teen, and it wasn't only Jewish teens, although it actually was led by three Jewish teens. But then I realized you should never give an entire like publication to a group of like middle school kids. I mean, that I'm like, what was I thinking? Um, I'm like, they didn't even show up for the Zoom, I'm like, guys. So, yes, and actually one college student wrote a beautiful essay for the On Being Jewish Now Substack that I loved. And I'm actually tonight at 8, like in an hour, like I'm talking to all the leaders of all the Hillels all over the country, and sharing the book and trying to help them through and what can we do and what can they do and all of that. So I'm trying to reach, and I want them all to contribute. And so originally when I talked to them, I was like, I'm going to just do a book of all of their essays. These are like the brightest kids at all the schools. Like, I should just do that, which I have not ruled out. So, let's see what happens at 8 o'clock. You just don't know.
Oh, yeah. What do you think the Hillel directors are looking for? Are they looking for sort of ways to use the book as a moment of teaching, or what do you think you'll be talking to them about?
Um, I'll be talking to them about that they're not alone, that this is going on, as they know well. We have a worksheet that we made, which is on the website, like a discussion guide that they can use to talk with their friends, Jewish and non-Jewish friends. We have a sort of a worksheet you can do, what does being Jewish mean to you, and encouraging them to take part in some of these like exercises, and if they need it, if they want to start conversation but don't know how or whatever. Um, and yeah, getting them all to write about their feelings, letting them know that there are resources and that there are so many allies, and they're not, I mean, it's a terrifying time. I mean, not that I haven't lived it because my kids are not in college yet, but from the documentary, and obviously from the news and everything else and all of the first person accounts, I mean, it's just terrifying, really terrifying. So,
I saw the worksheet, I think on Amazon. I think I saw a worksheet that goes along with it. I wasn't quite sure. I was like, if it was sanctioned by you, if that was separate, but it looked like, can people actually, is this something that people can buy
oh no, it's
separately?
free. It's free.
Okay.
It's on so I'll put the link in again. But on the Substack, I tried to put like one article with like all the links that's right in the middle. So everything is there, including the link to the discussion guide. It's also all on zibbymedia.com as well under the On Being Jewish Now book. You could probably Google it. I don't know. But I tried to put it everywhere, and links to it everywhere. So hopefully, hopefully people can find it. Um, I don't know. What do you think I should say to all the Hillel leaders? What would you want them to know?
I know. I think you should use this moment, use our like very smart audience here
Yeah,
to
tell me. Put
like
it in the chat.
together.
What should I talk to them about? What should they know? What should I ask them?
Um, Zibby, I feel like you've taken on so many interesting things, and I feel like even just opening up a publishing company when you did, or opening up a bookstore in some ways are counterintuitive, right? These aren't necessarily like thriving business spaces now, and you've really taken your own approach and putting your own imprint on them. I was really struck. I was in your bookstore, I don't know, I don't remember when it was recently, and you walk in and it's like a regular bookstore, but then like you're like, wait, this is different than I've seen a bookstore, because the bookshelves are organized not by like nonfiction, fiction. You're like, here's a section of books that will make you feel sad or that will make you cry. It was like a whole interesting way of like rethinking how you do a bookstore. And I'm just curious sort of how you like how you made that decision to do both those things. I think it also tells us something about you. I was just really struck that to like be able to walk into a space that you think you know well and experience it really differently.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm so glad you were at the store. I love the store so much. It's like my happy place in the world. Uh, I Once I got to know all the authors well from the podcast, and I became an author myself, it just seemed so clear to me how some things needed to change or how I could maybe help. Um, and I I'm not afraid of like trying something new. Like I'm not afraid of failing. And I don't know even if I define failure in the same way. I'm doing all this to give back, right? It is a business, but I'm trying to give back. I'm trying to be thankful for like the role of books in my own life. I am so indebted to books and authors, and my bookstore is designed all around discovery of authors who might have been not picked by the big five as a lead title and yet are just as good, or in some cases better. And that sort of machinery I've seen sort of behind the scenes now, and I actually wrote all about it in Blank. That was sort of like a satire of that whole thing. I like to try things. We change the shelves a lot. I'm like, the other day I was in there and like four different people came in and were asking me like they needed a book for a friend who was getting divorced. And I was like, we need a shelf. So then like within an hour, we had a reeling from divorce shelf, right? And so we're responding to the community. We're giving people sort of what they need, what they're looking for. Like people don't come into a bookstore and say like, I'm looking for a novel by an author whose last name starts with C, right? That's not how people, they're like in the mood, they need something. So I think what we're trying to do with the publishing house and with the bookstore and really everything is just like, what what need of yours is not being met? Like I want to give you a book that you need. I want to give you a book that's going to help you in your life in some way, and you know that best. So if I can just put out the different buckets that are slightly different, like and narrow it down, because I think a lot of also what I do is curation, and like the options can feel limitless. Like there are 8 bazillion books that come out all the time, but if I can narrow it down to 15 books that are about coming of age, like maybe you'll pick one of those. But if you go and you're like, oh, I am looking for that. Like that is helpful to me, and I am going through heartbreak or whatever it is.
Which is
And
sounds like exactly like sort of your approach to this, right? Which was like, what do people need? It sounds like the question you were asking
yeah.
when
And
you put
also,
together.
what's the worst that can happen? Like, I tried to help authors with a publishing company and it didn't work out. Okay, like let's just say that happened. Like, I feel pretty good about that. Like, I tried something and I did it, and I didn't just say I was going to do it. Like, I just did it. And those were kind of bigger things. Normally, the risks I take are like, how about we try a new website? But it's all the same. It's all designed to help, and if it doesn't, I'll pivot. I'm not like, committed to anything forever. I'll go where I'll go where I'm called.
Um, Zibby, I have a question for you that I sort of have a love-hate relationship with asking this question because I feel like people only ask women this question. And it's the like how I get it done question, which is just I really appreciate how open and honest you are in social media. You are not someone who's trying to paint like a rosy picture. I feel like you put the hard stuff out there too. But at the same time, I really don't know how you do everything that you do. And I'm wondering if you have any tips or hacks or that sort of allow you to balance everything that you're doing.
I mean, that implies I am balancing it effectively, which I never said I was. I'm not doing everything every day. Right, I am doing all these things in general. I have teams. I've hired fabulous people, and I spend a lot of time on that, making sure I have the right people, and making sure that the people that I am working with are using their skills to do whatever that's good. So I think delegating, I have two of my kids are at boarding school, so they're not here every day. Then I have a 9 and 11-year-old who are here, but I'm also divorced and remarried. So every other weekend, I basically have a long weekend without them. And I get a lot done. I mean, that is when I write. Like, I don't write anything when I have the kids. I don't know how anybody can do that. Like, so I do a lot of this because, 4 days out of every 14, I am just with my husband, and I fill my time, much to his chagrin, basically working. I mean, sometimes we go to dinner, I don't know. But we're both building businesses, and this is what I'm passionate about. So anyway, that's the biggest thing, is that I'm not at home with four little kids. I mean, forget it. I stayed home with my kids for 11 years, so I couldn't do really anything. And in terms of hacks, um, I am like obsessive about email. Um, I When it gets to like 300 in my inbox, I like spend however long and don't sleep until I can like at least get it under 100. I sort it. I take all my inbox. I have like six different inboxes for all the different things. So I'll be like, I'm going to tackle publishing, and then I'll go to that inbox and I'll sort it alphabetically and just like bang it out. And then I'll go to my general inbox, which is always bigger, and sort that. And then sometimes I get so discouraged I'm not making enough progress that I like sort it backwards, and I like go to the Z's and work my way up, and all of that. I set timers and alarms when I need to get things done. I live by my calendar. Um, I read every night so that I can keep up. I've learned how to speed read basically so I can, prepare for the podcast, which come out every single day. I love talking to authors, so that's like fun. I think that it's all pretty fun until it gets to be too much. And my kids, like tonight's not the best night. Like I've been on Zooms. I'm gonna get off Zoom, go have dinner with them. Then I'm gonna have another Zoom at 8. But then I'll put them to bed, and like maybe we'll have a sleepover, and like I picked them up from school and I dropped them off at school, and we did this together and that together. And, my daughter like did her homework next to me. Like we're together. So I don't know. It's not perfect. And I don't make time for anything else other than really kids and work when I'm in New York and have the kids. I don't go to shows. I don't like work out. I don't go to lunches. I skip most board meetings I'm supposed to go to. Like I do this. This is what I do.
Um, First of all, Zibby, thank you so much for based on what you do, first of all, for putting this book together, for taking the time to speak with us, getting off and then speaking with Hillel director. We have one last question that just came in, and I will end with this question before we get off. They are asking, they said they would love recommendations for any books that we can recommend to non-Jews to educate themselves and better understand the anti-Semitism in our world, especially now, and the history of the Jewish people and our experiences. Something to help examine maybe their own unconscious anti-Semitism. I know you're not a librarian. I don't expect you to have like
No, it's fine.
a
It's fine.
list, but
I would recommend Uncomfortable Conversations with a Jew by Noah Tishby and Emmanuel Acho. Emmanuel Acho is black, Noah Tishby is Israeli, and they have a conversation in real time where she explains everything to him, and they have a very interesting dialogue. I picked it from my book club. So I would start there. Obviously, my book, of course. Let me just put it up again. No, but I think that's really good. I think that Lee Yaron's book 10/7 about the October 7th attacks is also just like incredibly powerful. And I think that some people think it was just what happened at the music festival. Like that is not what happened. So I think that that is interesting. I think that Bernard Henri Levy's book, Israel Alone, is really interesting. Um, I think Humans of Judaism is great. Um, those are a few.
yeah, that's a great mix, and I feel like covers a gamut. And yes, as Zibby said, and I'm being now. Thank you, Zibby. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. It was a pleasure speaking with you. And have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Care.